Hey folks, this is Blake Butler, Executive Director of the North Carolina Industrial Hemp Association, again for another segment of Plant, our instructional growing event. And we're very pleased to have an association member and a great grower in the eastern part of the state, Ryan Patterson of Ryes Greenhouses and Broadway Hemp. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. Good to see you.
So if you could take us back a little bit, Ryan, when you started, because you're a tobacco farmer, you've grown all sorts of row crops up there. So what led you into hemp?
Well, my interest started, my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's in the fall of 2016, and he was taking several different medications that were making him worse. And so I got to researching online and found several articles about how cannabis and specifically hemp had helped some of those patients. And through my research, I found that North Carolina was going to have a pilot program in 2017, and we got him some hemp that first year. Found some in North Carolina. He took some, saw some results from it, and that was just, that was kind of the light bulb moment for me. We knew that this is for real. And like I said, through that research, we found out North Carolina was going to have a pilot program starting in 2017. And so we got our license. Was one of the first few in the state to get a license, and grew a few hundred plants in 2017. So that's how I got started.
So did you start with seeds or clones? Did you just experiment with both? Because I know you can see different results indoors and outdoors based on where you are in the state.
Yeah, so we started with clones, and I'd be ashamed to tell you the price that I paid for some of those first clones. It was
nobody talks about those first years, right?
It was outrageous, and then we, I think seriously, we got the leftovers. They were full of bugs, and not a low percentage of them lived, partially due to the state of the plants when they got here, and then I managed to kill a few that first year myself.
But that's a good point is, know your source where you're getting your clones and seeds, and it's possible to close the loop and get them closer and be able to work with someone. And that's what I like about your operation at Ryes Greenhouses, is you provide strange genetics for different farmers out there. One of the misconceptions I'm hearing that I wanted to ask you about is there's no pest management needed in indoor grows. And that's really not what I heard from you guys last year at our various events. And people seem to be tracking the little pests that might show back up in greenhouse grows. And a lot of growers are under the assumption that that's not, pest management is not something that they have to worry about. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, a greenhouse or indoor grow is probably, it does take more intense management, because a lot of times it's the perfect environment. And if you get something in that facility, in your greenhouse or in your indoor facility, then it has no other options to feed on usually. And so it's definitely gonna find a way to make the hemp its home. And so we've been dealing with that issue for over 20 years with greenhouse tomato production. Mm-hmm. And we've had to do a lot of preventative measures over the years to keep pests out, to to sometimes even keeping people away that's been in other greenhouses or other growing facilities because of what they could bring into your facility.
And what specific pests do you see returning each year and where you are in the state?
In hemp particular, we're seeing the spider mite, the hemp russet mite. It seems like you're gonna always have to fight powdery mildew and botrytis. Those are definitely the top issues in the greenhouse production. Now in field production, the corn earworm, caterpillars, just worms in general was definitely the biggest issue in 18 and 19 for outdoor production.
Well, something to keep in mind for all our growers for the first, second, or third year, that pests are going to be out there. And like you mentioned, once they get inside that greenhouse, those are the optimal conditions. They're going to hang around. There's no reason to even leave until you figure out how to get rid of them. So with all of that, I'm sure you found ways to keep that THC at that under that 0.3, but maximize your CBD. Any tips that you can kind of pass on to any of the growers, kind of a live and learn, on a live and learn basis?
Well, I I think by and large that THC and CBD number is starts with good genetics. It's in the genetics of the plant. There's only so much you can do to optimize that. Obviously, feeding the plant correctly, just like these guys with these outrageous yields that they're getting in row crops. And what they're doing is that plant has a certain yield potential, and any limiting factor that you have is, limiting that yield potential on the back end. And it's the same thing with any crop you grow. It's the analogy of the barrel with the holes in it, and we got to, whichever one is that limiting factor, we've got to correct that one and then move on to the next one. And so, as far as optimizing CBD production, again, I think it's mainly in the genetics, but also we've got to look after those plants to meet that plant's potential. You've got to feed it the nutrients, give it the environment as close as possible to what it needs. And honestly, I could give you a blueprint for growing greenhouse tomatoes, and if you followed that, you could make greenhouse tomatoes. I guarantee you could make so many nice sellable greenhouse tomatoes, pound wise. But I don't know that we have a perfect recipe for cannabis or for hemp yet, and so we're still learning. But we are, we're doing work tracking fertility and tracking temperature, humidity, and seeing what's going to, what is those optimal levels.
And I'm glad, a lot of it. I'm glad you mentioned that. If you don't mind, if I can interrupt you for a second. So because you sell a lot of clones across North Carolina, across the South, and so you're starting to get a better idea maybe of what genetic strains work better in certain parts of the states based on that feedback from your clients and customers.
Yeah, definitely. So we've seen a couple varieties that really stood out in 2019, and granted, it's only 1 year of data, so everybody has to take it with a grain of salt, I guess. But Bayox and Sweetened in our area in general stood out this past year, and those varieties in particular. The reason I mention them, there's other varieties that had some really good CBD numbers in 2019, but what we're looking at now is having to go under the total THC compliance. Right. And so the Bayox and Sweetened, I think, have the potential. All these varieties, the THC and the CBD run together. If you had corresponding graphs, they're going to go up together, and all of them reach a certain max or a certain point. And so what we've been doing with varieties is tracking them from week 4 basically through week 8 or 9 till the plant finishes, and see at what week it exceeds that THC, that total THC level, and see where those CBD numbers are. Unfortunately, a lot of the varieties that we've been using is topping out around 7 or 8%. But we do have a few outliers from some genetic companies that we are working with that we think we can reach 8 to 10%. And that's one thing that I would caution a lot of growers, especially first-year growers, is be aware of these guys that are sending out COAs that show 15% right. CBD and total THC compliance, because I'm not convinced that it's out there right now. And we have got samples of seeds from 3 different genetics companies, and they were actually the same sample. They just blacked out, and it's 3 different variety names. So yeah, everyone just needs to be aware that they know where their seed source and plant source is. Yeah.
So Ryan, do you think eventually we're heading towards and say 4 or 5 years down the road is locking in to which genetics, which strains will work best with the soil humidity in our part of the state, so eventually we can build that kind of clone forecast and seed forecast?
Yeah, and I think not only that, what works here in North Carolina, but if you got a contract with a reputable processor and they are you find a certain variety or a certain strand that yields best for them on the back end, then we might have to change our agronomic practices or the way we grow to make, to adapt to grow that particular variety. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the fact of variety that will grow best here in North Carolina. It's also the variety that, produces the end product that the consumer wants or the processor wants.
Right. So give us an idea for those growers and others that are listening right now. what you offer at Ryes greenhouses, and of course you have Broadway hemp too, but as far as clones that might be available, some of the strains and genetics, and I know folks can find you online at ryesgreenhouse.com, and I'll put that link right there. But give us an idea of what's available right now for some of these folks.
So clone-wise, we have Bayox, sweetened, cherry wine. We have a citrus cherry. And then we have some of those new varieties that I mentioned earlier from Sunrise Genetics. We have 5 First Light varieties. So there's a FL80, FL71, FL70, FL58, and a FL49. All those
which FL will work best.
Yeah, we don't know. That's what. So guys are calling me about some of these First Light varieties, and we're recommending that they plant a quarter acre, a half acre, maybe an acre at the most. Don't go plant 20 acres because honestly, we don't know how they're going to perform here in the Southeast. And so, but they do show promise, a lot of promise in tests. Those are some of the varieties that are hitting 8 to 10% CBD with total THC compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another one. In fact, all those First Light varieties went through Dr. Larry Smart and Cornell's program. And another one that did from STEM Holdings is called TJ's, and it was one that Dr. Smart considered a outlier that is showing again plus 8% CBD percentage with total THC compliance. So we've worked out arrangements with these companies to be able to replicate these varieties and sell them to farmers here in North Carolina and throughout the Southeast or the United States. And we don't, they all come with a disclaimer. We don't know how they're going to perform here, but we do know that the initial test results look really good.
Mm-hmm. It's all about
on top of that, we have over 20 varieties in a test that we're doing right now in a blackout greenhouse, and we're going to monitor these varieties at week 4 through 8 and test them every week so that we can. And look, I realize because I grow both outdoors and in the greenhouse that it's not exactly the same as growing outdoors, but we got to have some kind of guidance at some point. And so that's why we've been collecting this information, is trying to give growers this guidance to, to stay diligent on the testing and get that crop harvested so we can stay in compliance.
Absolutely. Well, I just love what you're doing for the growers, the community around you, and continuing with the research and the data so we can move towards consistent, genetics and seed strains and others. So thanks so much, Ryan, for spending some time with me. It's great to get some insight from you that's been in it from the very beginning. And once again, folks, all the links to find Ryan, Broadway Hemp, and Ryes greenhouses are right here below me. And if you're interested in some clones and dealing with someone local here in North Carolina that will help you along the way, reach out to Ryan Patterson. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Ryan. And tell Paul Thomas I said hello.
No, and Blake, I just want to mention too that we also have some feminized seed varieties of Bayox, sweetened, Stormy Daniels, Golden Redwood, Carolina Dream, and Wild Bourbon. And then not only that, through our research over the last couple of years, we've come up with a 162 cell tray that we think is kind of optimal for hemp transplants. Mm-hmm. And we can offer seeding on trays like that. We can offer just a cellar tray. We can take your variety and seed it in that tray, and you can take it back to your greenhouse and grow it. So we got a lot of options, and we just want to let everyone know what we can offer and hope we can help the grower and make them a successful start as possible.
Well, you're already helping the grower. I mean, you really are by being out there and figuring out for everyone else of what's going to work the best on the yield and genetic, and of course, stay in compliance. But once again, thanks so much, Ryan. I look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks for being here on Plant, and thanks for your support of the association.
Yep. Thank you, Blake, for all y'all doing.
Absolutely.